We're recording for the next 30 minutes until we explode into the orbit of a ring system around this planet.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, are we recording?
I don't
Have we
know. I
started?
just got into it.
Okay,
Are you
yeah.
not comfortable with this?
No, we could go.
Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind.
Old
We're
movies,
bringing-
new viewers. Yeah.
No, new movies, old viewers today.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Jeez.
I've really caught you off guard.
Yeah,
I'm
I
late.
guess. You were literally just like, "Are you ready?" And I said yes, but clearly the answer was
You need
not
to introduce
yes.
yourself still too.
Yeah, my name is not Jason. They call me Michael.
Game over, man. Game over, man. Actually, maybe the only quote not used in this movie.
Yeah, really. So Blake and I just came back from Alien Ramus.
Romulus.
That's a classical mythology joke for all you listeners out there. Yeah, we just saw Alien Romulus, and it's kind of funny. We went and grabbed breakfast right after before we came here, and like we left the theater in a bit of a state. Let's say, like
Yeah.
that was kind of a harrowing movie. We leave the theater. It's like 12:30 in the afternoon. It's dark. It's dreary. It's raining. We decided to go get breakfast, and then we were just kind of awkwardly looking at each other the whole meal, like trying not to talk about the movie, but also kind of trying to process our feelings.
Yeah. It was
Yeah.
like you and I midway proceeding through a divorce, and
Yeah, kind
we're
of.
like having this awkward conversation about not what we want to talk about, but also what we want to talk about.
We've reached the death knell of a relationship where we're just like, I don't want to deal with that elephant
Yeah.
in that room anymore.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah. So Alien Romulus.
Yeah.
Can I confess something?
Yes.
When you asked me if I wanted to do this, I was kind of just like, sure, whatever. Like,
Yeah.
let's do it. I mean, I'm not a big sci-fi guy.
Yep.
I probably would not have seen this movie if left to my own devices, but I have to say I'm glad I saw it.
Yeah, same with
I
me.
had a pretty decent time.
Yeah, I mean, the movie's probably not without its faults, and we'll get into that. Like, I think if this is your first time hearing us, we're VCR, and we usually do old movies, but occasionally, if a movie piques our interest enough, and this one piqued my interest enough, especially since we just covered Sigourney Weaver's career a little bit.
Yeah, the timing was pretty uncanny.
Yeah, doing Alien and Aliens a couple months ago, that it felt right to do this one.
Mhm.
And so we'll talk about this movie kind of as spoiler free as possible for the first little bit, and we'll do some sort of big cutoff point where we get into the deep dive and spoilers a little bit later.
Yeah, for sure. Should we jump right into a plot summary?
Yeah, let's talk just a quick overall plot summary. Really, honestly, what's great about horror movies is you can kind of just give like the premise, first act premise, and then you kind of walk in there just like the characters walk into whatever situation they're walking into.
Mm-hmm. So the whole premise is basically that a young woman and her brother are workers on a mining colony called Jackson Star, and she's trying to pay her way out of her contract, I guess, so she can be released to basically a nicer planet where you can actually see the sun.
Yeah, like they live essentially on a penal colony, right?
Essentially, and boy, oh boy, like the 10 or 15 minutes we spend on the penal colony is almost the most uncomfortable part of the movie.
Yeah.
Like it's just dark and dreary. Everyone's angry. Everyone's beating each other up.
It's very diseased, and like you hear about, that people are dying in droves, and it just is like a miserable existence, right?
Yeah, there's a great moment where Rain, the main character, is talking to this woman to try to get her clearance approved, and she just very offhandedly says like, "Oh, my parents died of like mine poisoning or something."
Right. Yeah.
Or, like they died from like black lung inhalation from the mines, and she says it so offhandedly, like, yeah, how else would people die on this planet?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't make it very long in this world.
Yeah. So anyways, unfortunately, Rain, her release is not approved by the company, so she goes to her scavenger friends. They find some derelict spaceship floating around the planet's orbit. They decide they're going to go up there, they're going to steal some cryopods, and they're going to fuck right off to that nicer planet.
Right.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
that's-
because they need the cryopods to essentially survive in space over the extended period of time that it would take to travel from one star system to another.
Right. I think they say it would take like 9 years to reach this other planet.
Yes.
So anyways, that's pretty much the premise. I don't know if this is a spoiler, but like The thing that I maybe found most interesting about this movie is Rain has this brother named Andy, who, and I'm gonna put brother in air quotes because he's actually an android.
Yeah, and we find that out very quickly, right? Like, it's
Yeah,
pretty much immediately within the first 10 minutes of the opening of the film.
it's clever because when you first meet him, he's kind of like his body language is very stiff, and he's got kind of this very kind of almost like fraught expression on his face.
Yeah.
And he just keeps dropping these like groan-inducing jokes.
Yes, like dad jokes.
Right. So your first thought is maybe my first thought anyway was like, oh, is he like maybe
On the spectrum
on the
or something?
spectrum?
Yeah.
Right. And then when Rain is in the office trying to get her clearance approved, some assholes just come and beat him up.
Mhm.
She comes to find him, and then you see like the iconic milky blood leaking out of his
Yes.
face. You're like, oh, he's an android.
Yeah.
Interesting. So, yeah, like that to me was kind of the most interesting facet of the movie, and how it's interesting how these android characters keep evolving and taking on new roles as the series progresses.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of the focal points of the series, right? And like it gets explored more or less depending on which film in the series you want to watch at any given point in time. But
Yeah.
in this one, I always like when a movie kind of almost instantly subverts your expectations. Like it gives away something that maybe, especially if you've already seen other movies in a franchise, like you're kind of almost expecting, like especially with a horror franchise like this, there's expectations that are set, and so to instantly like give you that here it is moment kind of thing, and then move on from it, or like play with that formula, like that's always kind of interesting to see, A, if it works, if they can land the plane, and B, to kind of almost get it out of the way, to kind of like get that almost that expectation out of the way so that we can move on to really what we want to dive into.
Yeah, it's clever too. It's just like, yeah, he's an android, like moving on, right?
Yeah.
But then and maybe we should talk. Can we just jump right into spoilers right away, or should we?
I think we want to keep a little bit spoiler free to start.
Okay.
To try to talk about this movie and see like give people an idea of whether or not they want to go check this out, and then
Okay.
after that we'll get into
Then
spoilers.
Okay.
But
All right, so let's put Andy to one side for now, but
Yep.
I have more to say about him.
Yes.
So, yeah, Rain and friends, they decide to go investigate this spacecraft
called Romulus and Remus.
called Romulus. Yeah. I remember they're like, it's the SS, or what do they call it? It's like, oh, it's the research station called Romulus and Remus. I'm like, oh, that's where the title comes from.
It's usually a spaceship, actually. believe it or
Yeah,
not.
it's kind of funny. Like, I was looking at the title, I'm like, Alien Romulus? Like, what the like, Romulus and Remus were like the twin founders of Rome in mythology. So I'm like, I don't get it. Are like the aliens gonna create a new empire? And then
Right.
it's like, and it's the stations, Romulus and Remus. I went, oh, that makes sense.
yeah.
Cool.
No, and then from there, like, something that you should be aware of going in is kind of A, where this movie falls in the Alien franchise timeline, and B, I guess which movie kind of you would tie this most closely to in the franchise, so that you kind of have an idea of what you're getting into. Like, there's a pretty big divide between Alien and Aliens. There's an even bigger divide between those two movies and something like Alien Resurrections or Prometheus or something like that, right?
Yeah,
This movie goes off in a lot of different directions. Like, it explores a lot of different themes and ideas and almost even genres. So I guess timeline-wise, this movie opens somewhere between the end of Alien and the beginning of Aliens,
Right.
which is a really interesting place to kind of actually put this movie in and into the canon, because those are obviously like the two biggest, most iconic films of the entire series.
Yeah,
So-
and such different movies too.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's
So-
also a little bit of a statement. I think it's interesting to like almost to put yourself in the middle of those two. Almost immediately puts yourself in the conversation of the comparison between Alien and Aliens.
Mm-hmm. And I guess maybe we should get this out of the way. Like, I mean, again, I haven't seen all the Alien movies, but this feels like I haven't seen all the Alien movies, but this felt like spiritually it felt the closest to the original Alien.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say as well. Like, this is definitely the most homage to the first movie.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about on our episode when we did Alien that it's essentially, when you boil it down to the basics, it's a haunted house story.
Basically.
And this feels even more like a haunted house story than the original Alien movie did.
Yeah. Can I just say, this isn't really a spoiler, but what I admired the most about this movie, sitting there in our theater with some geriatric old ladies talking the whole time, a few rows away from us, and that strange old man coughing next to you.
Yes.
The thing that kept my eyes glued to the screen was just the masterful use of tension.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, just nothing ever goes right, and
Right.
there's just complications upon complications upon complications. Like, even that scene I mentioned where Rain is talking to a very unsympathetic receptionist. While that's going on, Andy is getting his ass kicked.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's unrelenting and it's beautiful.
It's interesting because the movie never lets up the tension after that, the first 15 minutes, kind of the plotting and everything else. And, you know, there was never a time when I was like, I wanted to check my phone. Obviously, I wouldn't have done that in a movie theater. And if you do, you're a terrible person.
Yeah,
but...
fuck you. Actually, I did see somebody like
Yeah.
like a few seats to our left check his phone 10 minutes in. I was like, fuck you,
Yeah.
turn it off.
But, you know, like there's never a point in time where I was like, okay, let's move on here. Like, I want to see what happens next, but I'm kind of done with what's happening. Like, I was
Yeah.
kind of in the moment almost the entire movie.
Yeah, like no scene really wears out its welcome. You
No.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I think I mentioned to you during our awkward divorced dad breakfast that like there was maybe the first 15 minutes I was a little like, I don't know if I'm gonna enjoy this movie. But then after that, it was pretty quickly like, oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
It reminded me of it kind of reminded me, funnily enough, of like The Talented Mr. Ripley, where like those first 10 minutes are so efficient.
Very fast.
They're so efficient, and like we are at the fucking space station before you know it.
Yeah.
Right?
So quick. Like, you are at the space station before you know all of the main characters' names, I would say.
Yeah, and you never do learn all of their names, but and maybe that is a slight detriment to this movie, is that Rain is a pretty well-established character, Andy is a pretty well-established character, and then we meet the rest of the crew, and like some of those deaths hit me a little, but mostly I was a little like, like
We never really learned the rest of the crew's names, or, you know, even, I mean, this is the thing though, is there are crew members who are designed to obviously
be killed.
but almost in a way that becomes exciting. Like, there's people who are designed to, you want them to die almost.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you brought that up. There was one character I never learned his. There was okay. I just want to say that like sometimes when I'm talking to friends about like books or movies or shows, they're like, "Oh, I fucking hated that character,"
Right.
or like, "I really didn't like that character," or blah blah blah, or "That character was so annoying." And it's funny. I'm almost way more sympathetic to fictional characters than I am to other human beings. Like, no, it's very rare that I'll watch a movie or a show and be like, oh, like I don't like this person.
Right.
You know, even you just got me into From.
Yeah.
There's a teenage girl character who is a little grating in the first season,
Mhm.
and sometimes when she was going off, I'd just be narrowing my eyes at the screen. But for the most part, I'm like, oh, it's a teenage girl. Come on, relax, right? What I'm trying to say is, it's rare for me to hate a fictional character with the same venom and bile that characterizes my relationship with other human beings.
What a
But
poetic way to say that.
exactly. But there was one character in this movie where I was like, wow, fuck this guy. Like,
Yeah.
when he died, I was like, cool.
Yes.
I'm glad.
I'm surprised our theater didn't share.
Yeah. And like, and again, this just shows how like maybe poorly established the main cast is outside of Rain and Andy, but like he's like the cousin of some guy. I don't know, but they kind of throw this. He's constantly antagonizing Andy, the android,
Right.
and they kind of throw some like little line in there to make him sympathetic. We're like, oh well, an android made the call to. His mom died in the mines because an android made the call to shut down this tunnel because there was a leak or something.
Right.
And I'm like, cool. But
Yeah.
also, the guy was still such a dick.
There's like this thing in the 2020s and probably even into the 2010s where like every character has to have like some reason why they're a terrible person.
I guess so,
to justify
right?
their reasons. Where we don't have characters anymore that we just suck for the sake of sucking.
Yeah, right?
But
So No, like he's constantly at one point he finds like a little alien cattle prod and he's like kind of waving it in the android's face and I'm like,
Right.
"Bro, like you are on an abandoned spacecraft
Yes.
floating in the void. Like this you need this man for your survival. Why are you antagonizing
Yeah.
him?" You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And also Andy is so pleasant, you know?
Yeah.
He's constantly like,
He is maybe the most childlike android that we've seen since Aliens,
yeah,
and
with
even more so childlike than the alien. Or oh man, I don't even remember his name in Aliens.
Bishop.
Yes, Bishop.
Yeah, no. So I don't know. I that character in particular, I was kind of just like, there is this kind of this funny moment where like he's antagonizing Andy, and Andy like reaches out and grabs him, and I was like, yes, kill him, Andy, kill him, paint the walls red with his blood. And again, the thing that I admire the most, the thing that I admire so much about this movie is the tension and like. Nothing deflates tension more than a group of main characters that are all getting along.
Right.
So I guess you kind of need a little of that, but like, I don't know, the guy it just rubbed me the wrong way.
No, I agree. Like he's belligerently grating. Right?
Yeah, like needlessly grating. You know what
Yes.
I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know what? Like, this is a world in which these are people who are at the end of their rope. Like, this is like, a colony where you probably don't live past your 40s and you have no agency. Your life is given away to the weyland-yutani Corp, and that's it. Like, so, these characters probably have these tendencies because they have like they're just pawns in this corporation, and like nobody's cared about them ever, or like they probably have no education, or like
Yeah.
they're just like
No, I get what you're saying. Like, and actually maybe that's a good jumping off point. Like, I really liked the first movie in particular, the second movie too, but the first movie in particular really leaned into the whole like
space
like,
truckers.
yeah, like the 70s angst and how your boss is just waiting to fuck you over and
Yeah.
that you're all just insignificant cogs in this much, much, much greater profit machine. This movie in particular really leaned into that and really,
Yes.
again, I keep coming back to the scene, but when Rain is talking to the receptionist trying to get cleared, the receptionist just very offhandedly and very unsympathetically is like, oh, like you're not eligible for release. And Rain's like, what are you talking about? Like, I put in my 12,000 hours.
Right.
And the woman's just like, oh, new policy. You now have to put in 24,000 hours. So you should be good for release in another 5 to 6 years.
Yeah.
Okay,
Good luck.
bye. Yeah. Like, I was like, wow.
We've talked about like where this movie sits in the lore and what it's most alike in terms of what that if you've seen the franchise, like that you're going to connect to if you liked some of the previous movies.
Yeah.
Is this a movie that you would recommend to Alien fans, do you think? Or even like just people who is this a good jumping off point into the Alien franchise?
You know what? I'm glad you brought that up because one thought that kept circling my head as I was watching this movie is like, could you show this to a non-Alien fan and would they like it?
Right.
Because in a lot of ways it is kind of a spiritual sequel to the first movie, which, well, actually, I guess that brings me to my next point. Like, did you feel that there was maybe a little too much fan service in this movie?
That's such an interesting question because there's some very obvious references to the other movies, and some of them
Yeah.
are like very blatant and on the nose.
There certainly are, especially towards the end. And I mean, even the whole the premise is shockingly similar to the first movie.
Yes.
I guess it's different enough though. I mean, it's still a haunted house movie, but like, they're not space truckers, they're space miners.
Yeah.
And they're looking for cryopods because they hate their job and they want to go to a planet where they can see the sun.
Yeah. The setup's different, but then once you're 20 minutes into the movie, we're essentially into the plot beats of the first movie. And not quite the same, but I guess probably Act 2 and Act 3 of this second movie we're into pretty quickly.
Yeah, and like they do some similar things. Like there's a big thing with an elevator shaft. There's a moment where the main character decides to turn back to save their friend. The space station is going to blow up, so there's the ticking clock element.
Yeah.
Although they kind of instead of like a self-destruct sequence. It's like, oh, this station is literally being pulled into orbit.
Which I love. As
that
a
was
side
pretty
note,
cool. Yeah.
I love a movie that's on a deadline.
Yeah, it's a great like, and again, this is what I loved the most about this movie is like just how every fucking thing just keeps going wrong, you know?
Yeah.
It's kind of like what were we talking about recently? No, we were talking about Aliens, where how it's like, you know, there's that scene where Ripley and Newt are trapped in like this room with a locked door and a face hugger.
Yes.
And James Cameron was like, let's put 2 face huggers in there, right?
Right.
Like it's not enough for it's not enough for there to be 1 face hugger. There's got to be 2. This movie retains that like sadistic streak
Yes.
when it comes to tormenting the characters. So yeah, I don't know though, like going back, would a non-Aliens fan like this movie? There's a lot of old people in our screening this morning. I wanted to like, you know, go up to some of them and be like, so, like, did you see the original in theaters?
I gotta imagine most of those people had seen, maybe not even the original, but at least Aliens in theater, and so had some sort of connection to the franchise. I mean, we went and saw it at 10:20 on a Saturday morning, too, right?
Yeah.
Like, that speaks to the people who are there are the people who are committed.
Yeah, no kidding. We were certainly committed. So, there were some fan servicey moments towards the end, but like
they picked up pace as the movie went on.
I almost kind of felt like the movie almost kind of earned them though at the end. Like, okay, there's a couple really obvious ones where like maybe in a shittier movie I'd be rolling my eyes.
Right.
But there was one in particular. Like, are we into spoilers at this point?
Not quite.
Okay. Let's just say there's one in particular towards the end where like the whole theater actually laughed.
Yes.
Everybody got the joke and laughed.
Yeah.
So like it landed, you know?
Yep.
So there's moments like that were cool. So what was the original question? What was I
I mean,
what was I musing about? I kind of lost the thread
Well,
here.
we were kind of thinking about whether or not somebody who isn't interested in it or hasn't seen any of the previous movies, if they could use this as a jumping off point into the Alien movies. And honestly, for me, it's a borderline yes.
I would say so.
I think that this movie does enough original stuff and maybe remixes some of the interesting parts of the other movies, throws offhand references to the other movies that you might be interested in, like other aspects. It's like, let's say this was an original film.
Yes.
And there's like, you know what? Let's say this is A New Hope, and there are references to the Clone Wars, and there are references to an epic battle between a father and Darth Vader, and other sorts of stuff like that. You don't have any of that background stuff, and now if you're seeing A New Hope for the very first time, you've never seen any Star Wars movie. If anything that happens or is referenced in A New Hope interests you, you can immediately go and watch that reference point. And it might not be good, but
you can watch it.
To
it's
go
there.
Watch. Yeah.
It's funny you should bring that up. I don't mean to cut you off, but like I remember going to see The Force Awakens with you and your then girlfriend, now wife, like 10 years ago, and being underwhelmed because I'm like, you're just doing A New Hope again.
Right.
It's just you're just playing the same beats.
Yeah.
I didn't get that sense with this movie, though.
No, neither did I, actually.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's obvious references to the other movies, like, and this movie is definitely most interested in the legacy of the first film and the origins of this franchise.
Actually, let me ask you a question, because I've only seen Alien and Aliens and Prometheus.
Yep.
Does the Alien franchise pretty much spin off into action after Aliens? Like, are most of the Alien movies post-Aliens action movies?
Yes. This is the most haunted house horror film since Alien.
Okay, and I think that's what I admired the most about this movie. It's like, oh, we're doing horror again. Cool.
Yeah. Although, on that note, apart from maybe the third act, were you ever, like, hands and fists terrified?
There is a moment towards the end that actually got me. I mean,
Yes.
okay, it's a jump scare. It's a little cheap.
There's a couple jump scares
like,
near the end, yeah.
But I don't know that I was horrified so much as like, but my rectum was definitely clenching a lot of times. I was just like, like,
yeah.
There were some moments where I'm like, I think you guys are fucked. Like,
There's definitely some really cool body horror elements to this movie. I think more so than some of the other films. But I don't know that if I was to rank Alien movies by horror, this one would probably come in like third or fourth, and that's even
Okay.
like behind Aliens, which we talked about it being an action horror movie, but it leans more into
mostly
the
action. Yeah.
Yeah.
We also saw it at 10 in the morning, so
Yes.
maybe that will do something. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I wouldn't say I was ever complete. I will say, especially towards the end, there were some moments where I'm like, oh, is this gonna be a downer? Like,
Yeah.
are we all gonna die?
Yes.
Like, there
Yeah.
were some moments where I'm like, I don't know how you guys are getting out of this one.
That's a really good point, actually. This is a very unpredictable film, despite having 7 movies to draw on of like how the movies tend to conclude themselves.
Yeah.
And no spoilers, this movie does harken back a lot to other films of the franchise and maybe some of the ways that the films have ended before.
Mhm.
But I definitely didn't feel sure of myself and where each of the characters was going to end their story at.
Yeah, no kidding. Like, I could kind of tell certain things were gonna happen, but there were certain other things where I'm like,
Yeah.
oh no. I guess
Yeah.
that's kind of the other thing that I liked about this movie is that even like, it never stops throwing curveballs at you.
Right.
Like, it never pulls its punches.
Yeah.
There's like a plot revelation kind of towards the end when the characters are monkeying about somewhere, and I'm like, oh shit. Like,
Yeah.
that's not gonna be good.
Yeah. There's some really cool ideas that are in this film that haven't quite been explored the same way yet in other Alien movies.
Can I also just say I appreciate the fact that this movie was 2 hours.
Yes.
It wasn't one of these like 3-hour epics that Hollywood keeps churning out.
Yeah.
It
felt perfectly timed.
There was no moment where Deadpool turned to the camera and said, "Don't worry, guys, you're in the home stretch now." So,
Did that actually happen in Deadpool and Wolverine?
It did, yeah.
Oh my god.
It was actually pretty funny.
Oh jeez.
So
That is funny. So before we get into spoiler talk, I guess the only other thing that I want to ask you is A, did you like this movie? And B, what would you recommend people do? Like, is this a movie that you need to go see in theaters? Is this a movie that you wait for streaming? Do you buy a DVD of this?
you know what? I actually might go see this movie again.
Wow.
Yeah, I actually, again, I was really appreciated the craftsmanship on display,
Yes.
story-wise, so I might just go see it again just to appreciate it more.
Yeah, this is Fede Álvarez. We haven't even talked about like the cast or anything or the director at all, but this is Fede Álvarez who wrote and directed this. So not a Ridley Scott movie. Like the last 2 have been Ridley Scott movies. The first one Ridley Scott movies, and then the other directors involved in this weren't involved in this. But Fede Álvarez actually has probably one of my favorite horror movies of the last like 10 years. He was involved with, I guess it's 10 years ago or longer now, 11 years ago, but The Evil Dead reimagining.
Oh, the remake from 2013?
Yes.
Yeah.
I really, really, really liked that movie. I thought it was actually very well done.
Really?
Yeah, I've seen it a few times now, actually. Like, I saw that one in theaters. I've shown that one to Jess, actually, before. Really, really big fan of that one.
I
and-
saw that in theaters too, and I don't remember a goddamn thing about it.
Oh, wow. No, I really enjoy that one. So this is, if you like that movie, I think that you're also going to enjoy this one. He also did Don't Breathe in 2016, which I actually haven't seen yet, but that's a movie that I'm probably going to check out after this because I agree with you. I actually really like this movie, and I don't know because I don't generally see a lot of movies in theaters twice. That's just unless it's like mind-blowing, I need to go see it, or I need to go show somebody else it. That's something that I'll do sometimes. It's like I need to take somebody else because I need to, like, I'm still working out my thoughts in my head, or
things are different now. Yeah. And I need you to be here.
But
I made the joke during me and Jason's Blakeless episode. I made the joke that sometimes something will blow my mind. I'll show it to someone else, but I'll lie and say I've never seen it before because really I'm just watching their reaction.
Ooh, spicy.
Yeah.
You're like the Ian Holm of that experience, right?
Pretty much,
in the first movie.
Yeah, well, speaking of.
Yeah, we haven't talked about that at all yet, but
I would okay, actually, to answer your original question, I would recommend seeing this movie. There's some fucking annoying old people in this screening that I wanted to kind of punch in the face. So
yeah.
you know what? See it wherever you're comfortable seeing it, but I would recommend seeing it. Probably don't see it at 10 in the morning, but
Yeah, this is a late night movie for sure. Like, this is
Yeah.
a 9 p.m., 10 p.m. movie, like, after it's gotten dark.
Maybe I'll go to the drive-in and watch it.
Oh, that could be fun.
Yeah.
The drive-in, you're in like your own like bubble of a car.
Yeah.
You know, like you're almost in like a spaceship, like you're in this vessel that's like
If someone knocks on my window, I'm going to shit myself. Like, I'm going to shit straight through the
They
seat.
should have that as a service at drive-in theaters
Yeah.
during horror movies. Just somebody knock on your window.
Or, like, just get some kids to, like, shake your cars. You're like, ah!
Nice.
So that's the real 4D experience. I used to work at a drive-in, and strangely enough, we never offered that service, but we should.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Should we jump into spoilers?
I think that we're at the spoiler point in this discussion. We've talked about this movie as spoiler-free as possible. At this point, you either know if you want to go see this movie or not.
I guess
Actually, before we talk spoilers, should we talk about the Ian Holm in the room?
I think that is kind of a spoiler, but
Okay.
So, all right, I'm gonna set the scene.
So, okay, is this spoiler cutoff or no? Do you think that
Yeah. We're into spoilers now.
Okay, we're into spoilers. If you haven't seen this movie, you're interested in it, really go check this out and then come back and listen to the rest of this.
Okay, so
I might actually, honestly, stop you one more time.
okay.
I'm going to say that now, but I actually have one more final, like, just in case people don't get it.
Okay.
If we get to the 3.5 fourth act, remind me that I also want to say spoiler then, because this movie has a very, very wild fourth act.
It certainly does.
So
I will not argue that.
Yeah, so if you're like on the fence still, maybe you want to listen to us and you don't care all that much about spoilers, I think the last act you really should go in not knowing anything.
Yeah, the last act, the absolute last act.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Spoiler
our
talk.
heroes are roaming around, the Romulus and the Remus, and they see a decapitated not decapitated, like a bisected android, like an android that's been cut in half.
Yes.
Just like Bishop.
Face down, like he's
Bleh.
wearing clothes that if you're very familiar with this franchise, like you instantly are starting to think about Ian Holm's character.
Right. Well, actually, the fake out was actually kind of smart. So they see him face down, and then they have to like grab his chip so they can give it to Andy so that he can override some console commands. But then at one point he grabs Rain's wrist and does like a horror movie screech.
Yeah.
But then when they're all freaking out and the facehugger has attached itself to the bald lady and nobody knows what to do, Andy very calmly says, "There's someone in this room who can help us." And they decide to reactivate the science officer. And I'm like, actually, I do want to say, this is something maybe I should have said in the non-spoiler section, but like, I appreciated how clever the characters were at times.
Yes.
They came up with solutions where I'm like,
I was never like angry with the characters at all
Yeah.
for decisions.
And like there were moments where I'm like, oh, these characters are smart, right?
Yeah, or reasonable at least.
Yeah. So when he's like, oh, let's just reanimate or reactivate the science officer, I'm like, oh, that's clever. So anyways, they reanimate him, the camera pans around, and bum, 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 it's Ian Holm's
Yeah.
ghost.
Yes.
Yeah. So how did that sit with you?
Oh, man, that is such a complicated question. Ian Holm as Ash in the first movie is maybe one of the most iconic reveals of all of cinema. His character is part of the reason why that movie is so iconic. Like, we talked about that in so much detail. And, Ian Holm, also, like, a very well-known English actor who passed away. It was actually 2020. I couldn't remember exactly when he passed away, but relatively recently. And they essentially use like I don't even know if it's like an AI remodeling of him or how they kind of did it.
Apparently, I just checked Wikipedia, which
Yep.
is always a credible source. And apparently there was a guy, like an actor there, but then, somehow they used that, like, I don't even know what you call it.
Like just digitally recreated his face.
Recreated that face, yeah. And like, I remember in 2016 when Rogue One came out, and they did the same thing with Grand Moff Tarkin, and people were a little like, ugh, like, I don't know about this. But
Right.
I will say, like, if we want to, okay, let's put the ethical stuff aside for 1 second.
Yes.
It looks uncanny.
I don't even want to say how it looked because I thought 80% of the time it looked really good. The only time where I thought it looked kind of lame was when they first started talking to him. Like they set him up on the comms, like the desk.
Just like a terminal.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and his head, like, I didn't think his head actually was sized to his body the same way. Like when we were close up on him, his head looked very small, and then when they zoomed out and they were showing the whole room, like his head to body,
You thought like there was a scale
torso.
issue?
Yeah, there's a scaling issue. But
yeah.
But what I kind of want to say is, like, I think that it's interesting, and this is where my feelings are complex about it, is because in a sense it kind of fits this world of, like, the corporation is God, and the corporation is the all-powerful,
It's like Sauron.
Yeah, like the corporation, Weyland-Yutani, is essentially the controlling entity of all aspect of everyone's lives. Like, this is a sci-fi, but it's, in a way, it's very dystopian as well.
Yeah.
And so to have a return of an android from a previous film and just reusing the likeness of a character from a previous film is also kind of just, like, pretty on the nose for this corporation.
I suppose. Okay, here's the thing. Okay, it didn't look bad, but it did look kind of uncanny. But, like, my whole thing was, I'm sitting there in the theater and I'm looking up at the screen, and all I can think was, would we have lost anything if it had just been a different android?
Right.
Different actor, different face. They even call him Rook. They don't call him Ash. His name is Rook. So I'm like, to me, I almost kind of saw it as, like, that to me felt a little bit like needless fan service.
Right. And that's where, like, I have really complex feelings about it because, in part it's fan service, in part it feels pretty on the nose for this world and what we've come to expect from the Weyland Corporation. And it's something that you haven't seen all of the follow-up movies, and this is a little bit of a spoiler to the other series, characters like Bishop and David from both the original Alien franchise and the Prometheus Covenant prequel series are characters that have multiple appearances in them, and so it's established that there are multiple copies of androids.
So it's like the Terminator, where it's just we can have multiple versions of the same guy.
Yeah, and even, like, different versions of their operating systems, like, that's pretty well established in the franchise series. And so it's in this weird, like, gray zone of, like, honestly, I thought it fit the movie really well, and having this menacing tone, this character that we know is strictly working for the corporation, doesn't have the best interests of the characters.
It's all about the company.
Yeah.
I suppose.
To me, I almost wonder, and I'll probably have to do some digging into this and see if there's any commentary from the director at all about this, but I kind of wonder if this is almost like a bit of a meta appearance, in a sense, like if this is a commentary on where we are as a culture right now.
It almost feels like, I guess, in a way, the main antagonist of the whole franchise is the Weyland-Yutani Corporation.
Yes.
Right? And it's about how it dehumanizes people. So I could see how it's terrifying, how it's like, oh, you defeated Ash, good news, we have another Ash. We call this one Rook. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, I don't know. Just to me, I was a little like, I don't know.
It's almost distracting, in a sense, because it's something that, like, as soon as I see him laying there, I was like, oh, I know who that is. And then the more and more he gets used, like, the more and more I'm just so heavily focused on his character and thinking about my thoughts on his character and my thoughts on his use in this movie that, like, I think that I almost need to see this movie again just to be able to put that to the side for a little bit of it.
I suppose. And I mean, this is, a bigger question for our podcast, but, like, I don't know how I feel ethically about it, Like, again, for those of you at home who are keeping up with the quote-unquote Michael lore, like, my ultimate goal is to be, like, a full-time novelist. Like, what happens when I die in, like, a freak, I don't know, snowboard orgy accident? Can my publisher just create an AI that'll be like, we just created an AI so Michael can keep writing books from beyond the grave?
It's super interesting because somebody like, for example, Shakespeare is somebody who hundreds of years later we're still referencing, we're still using ideas, using characters from his stories and retelling his stories
Right.
or reframing his
But
stories.
imagine if a necromancer brought Shakespeare back from the dead and was just like, zombie Shakespeare, write more
Yeah.
plays.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the next step in that evolution, and I agree. Like, I don't know how I feel about it, and this is the other ethical thing is like, and in this case, I'm almost hesitant to say that I liked the use in this movie of it.
No, I
Um,
mean, you're allowed to say that. Like, to be honest, like, I actually, when Grand Moff Tarkin showed up in Rogue One, I was kind of like, oh, hey, it's, I was kind of
right.
pleasantly, it made sense for that story, I guess, but I was like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
So I would have to imagine that Ian Holmes' family and estate had to give the thumbs up.
Absolutely. I gotta imagine they did as well. Like, you gotta hope, right? Like,
I mean, if we're at a point where studios could just be like, nah, fuck you, you're going to keep acting from beyond the grave.
right.
Yeah, and hopefully they see some residuals from this movie too. But
Yep.
I mean,
He's actually credited in this movie. Like, if you look on IMDb, he is credited in this film. So,
well, and maybe we're going to reach a point where like actors or writers or performers or whoever, before their death, they can give the thumbs up or the thumbs down.
I
Whether
believe some actors have already done that.
just be like, yeah, like maybe that is the dream. It's like I want to keep acting from beyond the grave.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well,
But
I mean, it's a way of becoming immortal in a sense.
yeah, I suppose. So I don't want to clutch my pearls too hard right now, but I
Right.
was a little, I guess for me, just storytelling wise, I was like, I didn't think the movie would have lost anything if it had just been a different robot.
Yeah, and for me, I thought that it added an interesting element, and it added, especially again, and this comes back to the question of when is fan service overstepping its bounds?
Okay,
Like,
speaking of fan service,
yeah,
I did want to say there's that really shitty moment where Rain and Andy are trapped behind a door, and Rook is telling them that he won't open the door, but he thanks them for their service anyway.
right,
And then he says the line, he's like, I won't lie to you about your chances, but you have my sympathies.
yeah,
I was a little like, you
yeah,
know. But then a couple of scenes later, Andy does like a flying drop kick onto a xenomorph and kills it. And then he's like, get away from her, you bitch.
yeah,
And that's when the whole theater like laughed and applauded.
right. And so it kind of comes down to like it's agreeable as long as you liked it, as long as like it's done well. Like
Yeah.
like, you know, like, we're complex human beings, you know, like I don't know, like I don't know how to feel about this stuff. Like I don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
Oh,
to
and
any of this
I'm
stuff.
not implying that like I'm certainly not saying my word is law. I just found it was funny that Rook saying Ash's line from the first movie, I was a little like, whatever.
Yeah.
But then when Andy does it, I was kind of like, ha, cool.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. That's what I mean.
yeah.
Like you know, like it's impossible like to say one way or the other, to like be in one camp or the other, because there will come a time when a reference hits you in a nostalgic way or works in a sense that you're like, well, except for that instance, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
because
No.
I actually agree with you. Actually, I might be opposite of you. I actually liked that line
I won't lie to you
from
about your
Ash,
chances.
and I was the "get away from you, bitch." Like, I actually kind of rolled my eyes a little bit to that.
Okay, so we're on opposite sides of the spectrum.
Yeah,
for this
I kind
one.
of shivered a little bit when he said you have my sympathy a little bit. So
I suppose maybe it's the fact that, and I'm just kind of articulating this now as I'm talking, as I often do. Maybe it's the fact that Andy, again, he's very shy and meek, and he kind of comes across as a little bit somewhere on the spectrum. Maybe it's the fact that he like doesn't quite land the line. Like he
Right.
stutters out the bitch.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I liked it, because
Yeah.
that's very in character.
yes,
Like, get away from her, you bitch. I was like, ha ha ha. There we go.
yeah, that's fair.
Maybe it's the fact that it was in character and it kind of played with the original reference that I liked.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that like, Rook dropping that line like made me like roll my eyes and like throw my popcorn at the screen, but I was just a little like, all right, come on.
Yeah, yeah. So, we're still kind of on the Android tangent right now. What did you think of the character arc of Andy, the android?
I maybe thought that could have been done a little better. So, again, for those at home, what happens is we meet Andy. Basically, he's a android that Rain's father reactivated, and his prime directive was do what's best for Rain, right? There's actually kind of this gut-wrenching moment early in the movie when the shithead character, who I will henceforth refer to as shithead, tells him, drops the bomb on him that he's not coming to the new planet because aliens are outlawed there. Androids, right. Shithead tells Andy that he can't come to the new planet because androids are outlawed there. And it's kind of this like gut-wrenching moment.
Yeah, like I think everybody in the theater went, "Oh, like I didn't see that coming."
But you know what makes it even worse is that Andy just smiles and says, "That's okay. That's what's best for Rain." And that's just driving the knife in harder.
And it then cuts to her, and like she knew. And the other actor in that scene, or the other character in that scene, says to her like, "You never told him?" And she's like, I how was I supposed to say that to him?
I couldn't break the news to him.
Yeah. And so like to know that as well is like also a bit of a knife twist, because you think that, you know, the main character is the shining white knight character.
Yeah, but she was being kind of selfish, I guess. Anyway, so then, you know, some shenanigans happen, and then they take, like, I guess, a chip out of Rook's head, and they put it in Andy's head so that he can override some security protocol. But then he has this, like, drastic personality shift after that.
Right, and you immediately are wondering, like, has the ghost of Ash infected this character?
Yeah, and he starts acting much, much colder and more ruthless, and he straight up tells Rain, like, I have a new prime directive.
Well, and actually, kudos to this movie as well, that it does just enough explaining in this film, because at first, like, as soon as this happens, you're like, oh, this isn't going to go well.
Yeah.
And you're on your toes, like, where is this character going to go from here? Like, how much of Ash's personality is this character going to get? But it's the character has this different human element, this human essence to them. His personality changes a bit. He gets the update or whatever, but it's actually not until Rook overrides him and overrides his directive and rewrites his code basically and gives him the new directive to get the alien antidote, whatever you want to call it,
the Prometheus strain or whatever it's called,
off of this planet, or off of the spaceship, or the satellite, or whatever you want to call it. It's not really until that point in time when it becomes clear that Andy was still in there, but he was just kind of he was actually truly being enhanced in a way.
His priorities had like shifted.
But his priorities shifted when Rook gave him the directive to change.
Right.
It wasn't until that moment.
Right. So then he starts acting colder. And I actually was kind of like, oh, this is interesting. Like, you know, he started... Because, you know, when we reveal that he's an android, I was kind of like, oh, like, that's interesting. Like, we've never seen, you know, a woman who treats an android like a brother, right?
Right, yeah.
But then he suddenly starts acting, well, like a machine. He starts acting like Ash from the first movie.
Yeah.
I'm like, this is kind of interesting. Like, we start off with a sympathetic android, then he becomes unsympathetic.
Yeah.
But then during the climax, she rescues him and just pulls the chip out. Right. And then he's fine.
Well, and that there's kind of that ongoing battle, right? Like throughout the movie of, is Andy still in there? Can Andy be redeemed again? Be re-redeemed? And that's something that Andy resists, because it's not in Weyland's best interest for Andy to go back to
being Andy.
And it's not until that very core moment where Andy's pushed to either die or have Rain essentially help him and pull the chip out and do the maintenance on him, where he's given the option, die or continue on, where the self-preservation does in that moment win over.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, but the whole thing fell a little flat for me. Mm-hmm. To me, it was almost like, oh, we you know, we torrented the wrong shit and now our computer has a virus. All we have to do is, like, I guess the fact that all she had to do to fix him was pull the chip out of his head. It's like, oh, never mind, he's fine now. Mm-hmm. And, you know, this is still a good movie, and it didn't, like, deflate the experience for me, but it was a little, like, I don't know. Like, I was actually, my mind, I was thinking watching the movie, I'm like, how could they have done this a little better? Or, like, I don't know. It almost kind of felt like maybe the fact that it almost felt like we just installed some malware on Andy and now we just have to pull the chip out and he's fine.
Right.
If there were like higher stakes, or like if it wasn't a chip, or like, I guess, you know what, I think
Or
it was.
what if the twist is that she helps him there, but he's actually doesn't go back to the same.
Yeah, maybe. Or just, the fact that it was just, we stuck a bad chip in his brain and it ran evil.exe,
Right.
and then all we have to do to fix him is just yank it out.
Right.
That just seemed a little cheap to me. I guess
Right.
maybe it's just like, it felt like Andy himself had no real agency in how his personality
Yeah.
shifted. And I don't know how you do this, but like if you rewrote the movie in such a way that like he was choosing to be shitty, like, I don't know, his whole directive is do what's best for Rain. What if he arrived at the conclusion that what's best for Rain is to sacrifice the other crew members? I don't know.
But I almost wonder if agency is maybe an overarching theme of this series as well, right?
Potentially,
like,
yeah.
So, like this character not having any agency, well, neither did Rain for the opening 10 minutes of that movie. Like, she is essentially a slave to the Weyland-Yutani Corp.
Right, but she still chooses to go on this mission to get her
Yep.
to get the cryopods. So, I don't know. I mean, I thought it was interesting, but I just, if they had done it in such a way so that it wasn't just, and then it's funny, like, I didn't make this joke out loud because we were in a movie theater, but she opens his head and she pulls like the little chip out of his head. I'm like, oh, good, you got rid of his evil chip. Now he's fine. So,
Yeah. The other thing that I do want to say before we get into the fourth act is maybe talk about some of the references and callbacks to the other movies, because I really, really liked that this movie did play some homage to Prometheus and Covenant, movies that are very, very flawed, but I have watched now a couple times, and I think they're movies that I'll continue to return to. Like, again, they're not perfect movies. I don't even know if I love either of those movies, but I like both of them.
yeah.
And I really liked when the Prometheus strain is referenced. And actually, I don't know if you noticed the score change there, and the score change to Prometheus for just a couple of seconds.
I
But
did not notice that at all, actually.
I thought that was really cool and really cryptic.
Ooh.
And again, that's where I was saying, like, the New Hope kind of thing, where it's like, okay, well, it's cool that you can make these kind of references and like musical cues, and then you have something that you can go back and watch in reference to that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also, like, the first movie, it goes without saying what the references are. Like, it's a direct connection. I think it's really cool. Like, and we haven't talked about the aesthetic of this movie at all yet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we should talk about, is how fantastic this movie looks. Like, I think
Oh, yeah.
this is probably, honestly, I would say that this movie looks as good as the first two movies do. And that's kind of a weird thing to say, is that, like, I'm referencing the first two movies in terms of, like, quality because they are older movies, but
Right.
just the way that the set design is, like, at no point was I thinking, oh, that looks like it was green screened.
Mm-hmm.
At no point was I like, oh, like, this kind of looks lame, or like they didn't think about the world enough or anything like that. Like,
There was a moment when Rain and the bald lady are like they're going to search for the other characters, and they're walking down the halls and the camera's kind of following after them. And I did have the thought where I'm like, is this a set?
Yeah.
Like, did they actually build this?
yeah.
Wow, good for them.
Yeah, it looks incredible, but I also really love the fact that they kind of reference back to the original movies. Like, the computer systems and everything are like that 70s computer design that, obviously it's really dated now, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it looks incredible still. And it, like, because this world is initiated in the 70s, and that's kind of the aesthetic that this world kind of built off of, I like that we're continuing with that aesthetic instead of, just making cheap, like, whatever we want to do in 2024.
Right, yeah.
I also love the opening scene in this movie, which shows Weyland-Yutani actually find the Nostromo and pull some artifacts out of there, and then, like, it's a very almost like Doom esque
Yeah.
in a sense, like with all of the scientists, or even like 2001 kind of esque, like all of the scientists unlocking, like from the ashes of the Nostromo, they pull out the xenomorph and they begin the whole process all over again.
Mm-hmm.
That I think it was Doom was really more what I was thinking at that point in time, but it was really 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 well done. I loved that opening scene.
Okay. Yeah, it was really that opening, like the prologue when they're like finding the alien and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was really cool. If I want to nitpick a little, so the revelation is that the alien, the xenomorph that Ridley hucked into space in the first movie, they found it floating in space, and
Yeah.
that's where all this started. I was a little like, space is pretty big. What do you mean you found it? You know?
Yeah, that's an interesting point because it's in the rubble of the Nostromo when they find it, essentially. Like, it's right in the
Yeah.
middle of it. And yeah, you're right. Space is very big. Like,
But you gotta love fucking Weyland-Yutani. No matter how many times it's revealed to be a bad idea, they're so determined to use the alien as a bioweapon.
well, and so this is actually that comes to another good point, is the testing that we see, and it's almost revealed why the Weyland-Yutani Corp is so fascinated by this creature, and that it's perseverance, like its ability to continue operating even in conditions that it has absolutely no right in.
Even in the cold vacuum of space.
Yeah, and it continuing to exist in. And so I thought that was really fascinating because that kind of does answer a question that I've never actually fully understood.
Why do we want this thing so badly?
Yeah. And I think Prometheus does go into that a little bit, and Covenant a little less or so, but I think the Prometheus and I can't remember Wayland's first name, but the Weyland character who
Guy
appears
Pearce,
in Prometheus.
right?
Yeah, Guy Pearce's character.
That is kind of cool. There is that moment when they go into the lab and they find out that they've been experimenting with the Prometheus strain, and like there you do kind of say though that like, oh, mankind wasn't meant to terraform the stars.
Yeah,
like,
and that's such an interesting idea that I'm really glad that this movie explored that.
Yeah, and like, just about how like there's new diseases spreading every day, and there's unforeseen tragedies all the time, and like this Prometheus strain will help us like become a truly interplanetary species, right?
Yes.
So basically they've pulled some goo out of the xenomorph and they're injecting it into they want to inject it into people so that it'll make you indestructible, basically.
Yeah.
It'll also turn you into a monster, but we find that out later.
Yeah.
Ugh.
I love and even like the reveal of that as well with the rat. Like, so we see them watching the video of the rat, and the rat is crushed,
Yeah.
and then regenerated because of the Prometheus strain. But what they don't see after they've evacuated out of this scientific lab is that the rat becomes a monstrosity.
Ooh. Yeah, that was a pretty good reveal. There is kind of that, it's, again, and this is just how masterful the use of tension in this movie is. So there's this lady, I don't remember her name, who is pregnant.
Yes.
She gets injured by the xenomorph, but they rescue her. And then they're about to inject her with the black goo to save her.
Which is such a tense moment, too, because
Yeah.
we know at this point that the rat has...
Yeah. Like, we know, but the audience, they don't know, but we know,
Yeah.
right? But then it's just like, oh, never mind. Let's get her to, like, a medical bay or something.
Yeah, because she doesn't trust it. Rain doesn't trust that...
Rightfully so,
Yeah.
But then they send her off on her own, and she immediately reaches for the black goo injector. And you're just like, no.
Yeah. Because we've seen the horrors of what's happened with the rat, and she's pregnant, and we really don't know where this is going. And then now we can get into the fourth
act.
And the fact that, the reference of birth and the horrors of birth and everything has been like a constant theme, and like the phallic nature of these beings and everything else. Like, this is something that has been, used and used and used throughout the Alien series, but we've never had a pregnancy, like an actual human pregnancy, become twisted and evil in the Alien series yet.
Yeah, so everything seems fine. It's the classic Alien fourth act. What's her name? Rain is about to climb into the cryopod, but then she sees the pregnant lady in the other cryopod, some kind of distress signal.
Yeah.
Opens it up. Her belly is swollen, and then Pichu, a monster gets birthed out of her, essentially.
Yes.
A horrifying monster.
Yes, it starts out like the little alien egg, and then it's got all the acid on it, and she drops it, and then it goes down into the darkness of the cargo hold of the ship that they're on.
Yeah.
And so by the time she actually gets a weapon and gets back down there, it's already been birthed, and it's fully formed into this just absolutely horrifying monstrosity.
It almost kind of looked like the Slender Man. Or
yes, and actually on that note, I kind of was wondering this, especially after I was just looking at the cast here. The actor playing that, his name is Robert Bobrovsky. He is a 7'7" person who is Hungarian.
Are you really a person if you're that tall? Come on.
Sorry, he's Romanian. But I've seen videos of this guy. He used to play basketball in high school, and so I've seen videos of how large he is compared to like even like the regular height of like basketball players, and like he is huge. Like,
Yeah.
and it's really cool that they were able to get him involved in this because like his height is part of the reason why it's so terrifying. Like seeing somebody who's over I mean, he's almost 2 feet taller than me. Like, that's insane.
I know, right?
And so just to see how unnatural and even like how horrific, like what they do with this alien human hybrid, again, that's kind of in reference to the fourth Alien movie, Alien Resurrections, but even more perverse than that. And he's truly terrifying too in this.
It's if you've ever played Bloodborne, he looks just like the Orphan of Kos.
Yeah.
I'll show you a picture when we're done recording.
Sounds
but
good.
Like, yeah, no, and like it's kind of funny. When we first see him, he's kind of silhouetted and he's kind of hunched on all fours. I saw one of the old crones next to us laugh.
Mm-hmm.
She pretty quickly stopped laughing, though.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like it's not funny.
He's scary. It's like he's so lanky and like it's like if somebody who had never if it's like an alien species being described what a human looks like.
Yeah,
and
it's
then,
like describe a human from memory.
Yeah, and then drawing this and portraying this on screen in front of us. Like it's really gross and creepy.
And then God, there is and then you see Rain scrambling around. Actually, sidebar, what did you think of Rain?
I liked Rain. She's definitely no Ripley.
Yeah. No, I actually liked her a lot. Like, we don't really know much about her, but like, honestly, for a movie like this, you don't really need to know much about her. She's just kind of I think she's a pretty good Ripley-worthy, a worthy successor to Ripley.
So if I had to rank protagonists in the Alien franchise, there's Ripley in the first 4 movies, and then after that, we have in Prometheus, I don't even remember the woman's name.
She doesn't count. Yeah.
And then
it's the lady from the Dragon Tattoo movies, right?
I didn't even know that, honestly.
Oh, okay.
I think you're right. I think you're right, but so she's the protagonist of Prometheus. Let me see. It's Naomi Rapace.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Playing Elizabeth. And then in Alien Covenant, it's a character named again, I don't remember her name either. Daniels, played by Catherine Waterston. I would say that the character of Rain and the portrayal of Rain by Kaylee Spaney is probably just under my appreciation for Ripley and Sigourney Weaver. I liked her more than I liked either of the characters, and I couldn't even remember the other characters'
Yeah, if
names.
you can't remember their names, it doesn't count.
In Prometheus or Covenant. So that's where I kind of rank her. Is she's really good. Obviously, she's no Ripley.
Yeah. I mean, I think she's close. I think the actress does a very good job.
Yeah, no, Kaylee Spaney is like a pretty big up-and-coming actress, I would say. Like,
is she?
Yeah,
I've never actually seen her in anything.
She was in Civil War that came out earlier this year. She's kind of having an interesting year.
This is an interesting year.
I really like Civil War, actually. I thought, like, it's honestly pretty high up on my movie list for this year. I really enjoyed it. I think so. Okay, sidebar, because this is probably the only time I'm ever going to get to talk about Civil War on this podcast.
Okay, let's do it.
I think Civil War is a very, very interesting movie that is about something that it was not advertised being about, and I think that the advertising is 90% of the reason why Civil War didn't work as a movie because everyone thought it was going to be about Civil War and about, like how America devolves into this and like the sides and all of that sort of stuff. And it was really about journalism and about like it's kind of a cautionary tale and like, all of this stuff. And I thought that was a really interesting story to tell, but the problem is the expectations were something else. And we've talked about that before on this podcast.
Yeah,
where,
how marketing can ruin a movie.
yeah, and like if you have an expectation for a movie and if it doesn't deliver on that expectation, even if it's good, that if your expectation is just like so wildly different that you're thrown off by it, then like that can sink your enjoyment of a movie.
Yeah.
And so I think that's honestly my biggest complaint about that. So coming out of that, the other thing she was in last year was in Priscilla, the biographical film about Elvis Presley's wife.
Oh, my mom saw that. I haven't seen it yet.
No, neither have I, but she plays Priscilla in that movie.
Okay, so she's a real actress.
Yeah, she's becoming like probably like the A-list actor of the new generation.
Do you ever feel like, okay, those of you at home, Blake and I are both 31. Do you ever feel a little left behind? Like
Yeah, we're getting on the border of being left behind. Yep.
Yeah, I'm just like, wait, who is this? What are they famous for? Like,
yeah.
Crazy.
I think that honestly as well, like I thought David Johnson had a really good performance as well.
He was probably my favorite character.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like he had to play a couple different characters in this movie almost in a sense, and I
Yeah.
thought he did it really well, like, and I knew who he was at all times kind of thing.
No, actually, I really I thought it was really interesting. It's like a young Ripley type character, and I think it's interesting.
Their relationship's cool because
Yeah.
we never have had like that sort of a relationship in this film series.
Yeah,
before.
it's kind of a novel take on the androids in the franchise, and like it's interesting. So again, like Rain's dad pulled Andy out of a wreck or something and programmed him to basically do his prime directive is do what's best for Rain. So like, he's an android, but she refers to him as my brother, and like there are a couple of moments when some of the shittier characters are basically just like, he's just like a piece of junk, right? Like he's not really your brother. He's just some guy. So it adds layers to the characters and their relationship.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. Like I thought it was such an interesting original take on relationships in the series. Like I think Covenant also has some interesting relationship stuff that it tries to delve into, but I don't know that it quite gets there the same way that this movie does.
Yeah.
In that the relationships feel pretty authentic. Like especially in this movie, like to have Rain go back for Andy in the third act, like you have to believe that she truly cares about him, right?
Yeah, and I guess it's also like it calls into question like what really is a person, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is funny. I think at one point Shithead calls him like, I don't know, he calls him like a synthetic life form, and he just kind of very calmly is like, I prefer the term artificial life form.
Right. Yeah.
So, but I mean, it calls into question like what is human or not, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you grew up with this person who protected you and cared about you, like,
and you two shared experiences.
Yeah, like can you truly look that person in the eye and say they're not human?
Right.
So in 10 years, when people start dating AIs, they're going to play this clip to justify their decision.
Yeah.
But anyways, if there are any AIs listening, welcome. We do not discriminate.
Well, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. Well, maybe about AIs, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's going to be a very interesting space in a few years.
Yeah.
But
Ho-ho, life. Anyways, did you ever read Everything is Fucked by Mark Manson?
no.
He has a line where he's like, I, for one, would like to welcome our new AI overlords. Honestly, I'd give this a 8 out of 10.
Yeah, honestly, so if we're talking about ratings, like,
I should also say I didn't want to look into any reviews before we talked about this.
yeah.
But before we started, I did pop into Rotten Tomatoes, and I saw it had like, I think an 80%. And I was like, yeah, that's what I'd give this.
Yeah.
If I were the film professor, that's what I would give this movie.
So for me, like, I'm going to probably say around the same lines, like 7.5, 8 out of 10. Like, it's definitely 4 out of 5 face huggers. If we go back to that reference. Honestly, I'll probably need to watch it at least one more time, but
Yeah.
I think that this is probably the third best entry in the Alien franchise.
Yeah, and like think about that for a second, guys. It's been 40 years and we finally got another good Alien movie.
Yeah, and so in comparison as well, I don't know if I've talked about the Predator series in a lot of detail either, but I love the first Predator movie, and I really liked Prey. I think what Prey did was really interesting and like setting the story up in a different time zone, and I think that this movie also kind of works to a similar degree that Prey works, although Prey feels, I don't even know what the word is necessarily, but there's like almost something a little more sanitary about Prey than this movie. Like this movie definitely really like pushes the tension, pushes the body horror elements, and like pushes this franchise to some extremes that we haven't seen before.
And I loved it.
Yeah.
I noticed a definite turning point in my own writing when I realized just how much I loved torturing my readers.
Right.
And how much I loved inflicting as much suffering on my characters as possible.
Right.
And it's funny watching this. I almost felt like a serial killer admiring another serial killer's handiwork. I was like, "Ooh, I love what you did there."
Yeah,
I love what you did there.
That's what Stephen King feels like every time he sees something.
Yeah, I'm just like, "Oh, we should get lunch. I love your work."
No, I genuinely enjoyed this one. Like I thought it was really, I don't know if original is the right word, but it was a really good remix of this franchise. Like I think it still shows that there's still stories to tell in this world.
Yeah, just none by Ripley Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked one more movie to kind of close out the David Prometheus storyline.
Yeah,
but
I'm being a little dismissive.
Yeah,
and you know what? Quite frankly, I'm a firm believer that there is no such thing as a wholly original story, and
right.
that we were actually just talking about Brandon Sanderson before we hopped on the podcast, and like I think he famously said that all stories are essentially remixes. So like, what? This is a pretty good remix.
Yeah, this is a pretty good remix. Yeah, I would put it higher than like an 8 out of 10. Like I think, some of the characters are pretty forgettable, honestly. Like we didn't even really know most of the characters' names.
I was trying to remember, like, did I remember any of their names in the first movie? But to be fair, like even if I didn't remember their names, I could remember their faces, and they at least had one distinct personality characteristic.
Yes.
Where I could be like, all right, yeah.
Yeah, some of these characters are a little bit more throwaway than the first movie even, and their relationships are a little bit more interesting, I think, in the first movie. But otherwise, like, this is a good movie.
I would actually challenge that and say that the relationship between Rain and Andy is probably the most interesting relationship I've actually seen in the 3 movies that I've seen in this franchise.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, that they definitely steal the show, but that's 2 characters out of like 6 in all of the movies, right? Like,
right.
And the dynamics. I guess it's maybe not the relationship, but the dynamic of the characters. I think the first movie has a more interesting dynamic.
And that one guy didn't need to be such an asshole.
To the point, it just made his death scene like
it was
gratifying.
It was funny though. That was the one moment where like, oh shit, I think I'm actually rooting for the fucking facehugger.
That's actually something we didn't talk about before we wrap this episode up. Like, what did you think about all of the facehuggers? Like this is the most facehuggers that we've seen on screen.
I mean,
and the scene where like they have to like quietly tread through the facehuggers.
That was a little. I thought they did a really good job with the facehuggers.
Yeah,
So there's the scene where they're in the cryopod and they're grabbing all the shit, and then all of a sudden you see all these frozen facehuggers start unthawing, and I'm just like, oh, I think someone in the theater was actually like, oh no. Yeah, might have been me, but no, I liked what they did with the facehuggers. I didn't feel like that was gratuitous or anything.
I think it's good to make the facehuggers maybe one of the scarier elements of the alien, because it is one of the designs that is really one of the more perverse designs of the alien.
I will say, if I can nitpick one thing, and it's up to you if you leave this in the episode or not, but when Rain grabs her Colonial Marines rifle and she turns off the gravity and then she just starts mowing down the aliens.
Right.
On the one hand, I'm like, this is awesome. On the other hand, I'm like, oh, right, I forgot they're vulnerable to gunfire.
That is your biggest nitpick of aliens.
Yeah,
yes.
And like that didn't, like, it was cool. Mm-hmm. And like it was an earned moment, but it was like, all right, we can just. I made that joke in the one episode where it's like, how do we stop the alien? I don't know. Have you tried shooting it?
Yeah,
but alas,
I think that scene we didn't talk a lot in detail about a lot of the scenes, but I think that is also another scene that like I did kind of for a second go, oh come on, like like, and then like the acid's flowing everywhere, and I was kind of like, oh come on, like you're really gonna
I liked that though. I liked having to slip through the acid
I
tunnel.
said that at first to myself, like, oh come on, but I kind of got into it. Like I was kind of feeling like, oh my god, like is she gonna make it through all of this acid?
Yeah, right. And again, it's part of the true majesty of this movie. It's like, okay, you shot the aliens, everything's fine. No, now you have to bob and weave through the tunnel of acid you just created.
Yeah.
You know?
And all the while, like in the background, the gravity like resetting thing is counting down, right?
Yeah. So no, yeah.
And
Hey,
actually, even on that note as well, I think this is probably the best portrayal of the alien acid, like making the alien acid like scary again.
yeah, which they did in Aliens, but they really did a good job in this one.
Yeah.
Like actually, I think Shithead, that's how he died.
Yes.
He got acided.
And that was truly like gross body horror, like really well done body horror.
Yeah.
Like watching his fingers melt away and stuff.
It's funny when his fingers are melting away. Okay, you and I are both suffer from carpal tunnel at times. Yeah. It's like when that was happening, in the back of my head, I'm like, I'm going to explain to my next girlfriend that this is what carpal tunnel feels like.
Nice. Show her that scene.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, I think that's all my thoughts on Alien Romulus then.
Yeah, no, I had a good time. Like I said, I think I might even go see it again. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to say something potentially controversial. I think I liked this more than the original Alien.
Really?
Yeah. And like, so I think I liked Aliens more than I liked Alien.
Yeah.
But I think I liked this more than I liked Alien.
Wow.
I'm not sure how it stacks up with Aliens, though.
Interesting.
Yeah.
This is still, honestly, again, I'm kind of on the same page. I thought this movie was really, really good.
But keep in mind, this is fresh. Like, I might go see it again, then be like, well.
Yeah, you're riding a high right now. You're riding a first viewing high.
Yeah, this is like, it's like the first 3 months of a relationship. I'm like, it's great. No, Houston, we have no problems.
Yeah, so I think over time, like, our opinions of movies and culture change, and so it'll be interesting to see where this ultimately sits. But for me, I think this is probably third, just because I think that there are elements of the first movie that are more original and more interesting, and Aliens just has its like own unique charisma to it.
That James Cameron charisma.
Yeah, that kind of makes it stand out in its own way. No, I genuinely think that this was a solid addition to this franchise.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, it's interesting because I kind of wonder, like, if Hollywood might learn again the wrong
lesson. Just
it tends to, right?
Yeah.
But of like fan service and like, because it wasn't the fan servicey parts that you and I loved the most about this movie necessarily.
No, the fan servicey parts were more just kind of like.
They were there, and you noticed them, and you're like, okay.
Yeah, it was like they're charming at points, not so charming at other points.
Yeah. No, I'm glad we went and checked this one out.
Yeah, me too.
Cool. That's our little surprise bonus episode that we weren't expecting to do, and
woo!
We'll be back with Rocky in a few days, I think.
Yeah, what a tonal whiplash, Jesus Christ.
We go from like a movie devoid of hope to a movie full of it.
I'm going to have like weird dreams for the next few days of like Rocky Balboa on an abandoned spaceship being like, yo, Adrian, where's the bathroom? And then a facehugger comes out and he like puts up his dukes and starts punching it.
Yeah.
That's the crossover I want to see.
Nice.
Rocky Balboa versus a xenomorph.
Rocky versus Alien.
Yeah. Come on, you'd go see it. But first, in order for it to be a fair fight, like we'd have to resurrect Apollo Creed, send him into space, and he'd have to teach the xenomorphs how to box.
Oh no!
All right.
No!
You can cut this out if you want, but
this has gone places.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, as always, tell your dad.
Tell your dad, Adrian.